Kathy Lundeen and Sandy Hatton here with the BuzzKillers, and we're with Craig Hansen today.
Hello.
He's on the Feasibility Committee, the School Committee. He's going to give us a little background on both of those things and some information on the Peter Fitzpatrick School. So take it away, Craig.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for having me here. I really,
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
So as you said, I'm on the Peter Fitzpatrick Feasibility Committee. I'm the chair of that committee. There are 9 citizens that were appointed back in July of 2018. And our charge was really to analyze the Peter Fitzpatrick property and see what the options were for the best options for the community. There's a lot of chatter around town about what to do with that property: sell it, tear it down, turn it into housing, public safety, market basket, strip mall, multi-use, you name it. All those options were out there. So what we did is, and when we came together, we actually had 11, I think, on the committee originally. A couple people resigned for personal reasons, but when we came together, there were 9 different opinions as to what to do with this thing. And we took a pretty pragmatic approach, looking at the data that was available. Town records were pretty bad in terms of the condition of the building and when certain renovations were done and whatnot. So we dug around, looked at records in town hall, talked to people. We got a consultant, Brett Pelletier from Kirk & Company, which is a professional real estate development firm out of Boston. And we got his services pro bono because we had 0 budget. So he volunteered his time, drove up here from Rhode Island for a number of our meetings, which we really appreciate. And he provided a lot of expertise in terms of other properties that were comparable to Peter Fitz, other buildings of that size or of that age, and what other communities have done with those. And it ran the range of pretty much everything that we've been looking into. So he helped us really focus in on, we can't just look at what's possible, but more, what does the community want? What's best for the community today? What's best for the community today may not be what's best for the community 10 years from now, and may not have been what was best 5-10 years ago. So we had to look at the situation as it existed now. When we started going through all the options, we realized pretty quickly that a number of the things that people have been talking about were just not feasible for a number of reasons. So tearing the building down is going to cost, and don't quote me on this, it's all in our report, it's like $1.2, $1.5 million just to tear it down. A lot of unknowns. There's asbestos in B wing, which is the 1960s portion. And from my experience on the high school building committee and Brett's experience with buildings of that era, there's a lot of unknowns. Once you open up a wall, you may find stuff you had no idea was there. So costs could escalate from there. Or maybe they didn't use as much asbestos and maybe you come out on the better end of it, but still some unknowns. But then if we tear it down, we're left with an empty lot, which is not worth a lot of money. It's big, it's got a lot of wetlands in the back, about 25% of it is wetlands. So that left another issue. We've got a lot of empty parcels around town that would just add another one. So then we looked at if we just sell it as it is. And the market for an 80,000 square foot school building is almost non-existent. So the problem with that is once we decide to sell it, no one's going to be using it. We're not going to start putting town offices in there and things like that, knowing we'd be selling the building. So then it's going to sit there for a couple of years on the market. And then you get kind of demolition by desertion, where it just starts to fall apart. And we're already seeing some of that today, where water leaks are popping up, roof leaks are popping up. Things are just happening because it's an old building and no one's in there. So then we looked at subdividing the property. There's about a 5-acre parcel, I shouldn't say parcel, a portion of the parcel, about 5 acres in the back corner. It's wooded, completely wooded, it's a little elevated. And what can we do with that? So we looked at chunking that off and maybe putting housing there, selling it to a private developer, and then we looked at the master plan and some of the work that committee's doing, and then the recreation master plan and some of the work that committee's been doing. And there's some needs that they've identified that without the results of those studies, our committee felt that there was opportunity there to further explore. We put athletic fields there that were highlighted as a need in the recreation study. Do we put some nature trails and some other outdoor activities that have been highlighted as part of the master plan committee? So we kind of left that as a possibility, but we did not feel that selling that off was in the best interest, because it's 1,000 feet from River Road. There's not enough access on the side of the building to get to Main Street. So now it's a landlocked parcel, you get zoning issues with that, there's a whole process to rezone it if it was multifamily, because it's town residence right now, which is single family homes. So as we went through, there were a couple other options we looked at, but then we got down to just reusing it, and what could we offer the community? Community centers booked solid all the time, we looked at their schedule. There's groups in there every night, the whole night, and you get competing groups, you get yoga, in the quilting group, they want it quiet, and then you get like Cub Scouts and kid activities that want it loud.
Yeah.
And they don't fit together in the same one-room community center. So with the need for space, with town offices that are some of those offices are in need for space, we talked to a number of organizations within town that said they need more space. And we felt that if we grow those programs and modeling it after similar programs in surrounding communities, that was the best option for the town. It would be self-sustaining, so it wouldn't cost the town anything. As you get people in there paying to use the building, the burden on the town that we're carrying now is $80,000 to $100,000 a year. So as you get people in there, that burden starts to chip away, and over 3 to 5 years, that could be zero. So now you've got a service in town that's generating revenue. Perhaps it's paying a lease payment to the town, so the town's actually generating revenue. You have a group that's maintaining the building, so that asset remains an asset for the town. And then the tax burden on the town is nothing, it actually gets lower from where it is today. So that was kind of the pathway in a shortened version of how we got there.
So I just have a few questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Self-sustaining, now there's leaks and other things going on, so would you get people in there before that got fixed, or fix it and then get people in there?
Yeah, so that would have to be part of the lease negotiations with like the town administrator and the board of selectmen. In general, my opinion would be that stuff would get fixed. You wouldn't want to lease a building to somebody that's got issues. Or if you do that, then that would have to be known, and that would then impact any lease payment or things like that. So at the end of the day, the recommendation is that it remains a town-owned building. So the town would be responsible for major infrastructure repairs. So we know the roof needs to be replaced in the next 3 to 5 years. The town actually had a roof study done on the roofs of all the towns, of all the buildings in town. And in the short term, it's about $80,000 to do the patchwork. That gets you another 5 to 7 years. But then you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a complete roof. And that roof was done in '94, so it's at the end of its life. But short answer, yes. I mean, the town, in my opinion, should be expected to at least bring it up to code.
So are you confident you can collect enough rent to cover and to eventually get profitable?
Yes.
You're pretty confident?
Yeah, we're pretty confident. So we looked at Groton Dunstable's community education and after-school programs. We looked at the Roden Bush Center in Westford. We've looked at, there's a new one, the Cogswell Arts Center in Haverhill. There were a couple others that we've looked at. And their revenues are pretty strong. And it's a combination of long-term leases. So if you get a daycare, you get a driving school, you get an art studio, those types of people who are gonna have a dedicated space and use that space for 5 to 10 years, that's your guaranteed revenue. Then you have kind of your short-term groups. So let's say you've got yoga that's in there on a recurring basis. If a nonprofit was maintaining the building, kind of like the community center today, where they do the marketing and the registrations, they take a cut of that. So that's per attendee, if you will. And then you have your one-time. So birthday party, a community event, a meeting, a farmer's market on the weekend, those types of things where it's a one-time use. They pay $50 for the afternoon or whatever it happens to be. And the combination of those three, we're very confident that get us 3 to 5 years out, that would be a self-sustaining building.
Do you have any tenants lined up?
So we don't have any lined up specifically. There were a number of people that we've talked to, and the issue was there was no commitment from the town that the building would be available. There was no commitment in terms of longevity of a lease. So there's people that are like, hey, I'm interested, but I'm not going to commit to anything just yet. We actually had through this process a alternative middle high school the Flat Collaborative that was very interested in the space. They loved it. The problem is Pepperell is the northeasternmost town in their school district, and it stretches all the way down west of Worcester. So it was just geographically too far. But fingers crossed we left the door open if they ever want to expand further east or even north into New Hampshire, that building's there.
So talk about the group you wanted to oversee it.
So a few members of the committee had founded a nonprofit called the Fitzpatrick Collaborative with the mission of bringing programs and activities to that building and have that be kind of the center of life of town. The vision being that you come and you go to a theater show from PCA that's in the building, or rehearsals that are in the building, or you go to an art class, a music class, you go to an after-school program, and afterwards, and this is the thing I always use, afterwards you go over to CNS, you grab a pizza, you get gas at Companies, and you go home. Instead of you're up in Hudson going to a class or doing karate in Brookline, and then giving them all your business, and then just going home. So we really want to create an atmosphere where there's activities in town.
So the nonprofit would take care of the building?
Take care of the building,
No town employee.
that's the vision.
No town employee involved?
So what our recommendation was is to have a board member of whatever nonprofit manages the building, have a board member that is a town employee or town appointed. So whether it's a board of selectmen member, someone they appoint, or if it's the TA or someone he appoints, but that the town remains involved, because what we don't want to have happen is have some entity manage the building but not manage the building. So we want to make sure that the town has a say in what is right for the town. They get a vote on what types of programs, what types of tenants, what types of business might move in there, if we get a light commercial, like overlay from a zoning perspective. But then also to check up and make sure that there's, again, no maintenance issues, that things are being taken care of as they should, and if they're not, that the lease is structured in a way that you take action to make sure that happens.
And would the nonprofit people have salaries?
That I can't answer. So in my the Fitzpatrick Collaborative vision is no. If you had someone running programs, that they may get paid for the work that they're doing, but board members on the nonprofit, not at all. No, and the way that, again, the Fitzpatrick Collaborative was filed with the state when we formed is that there are no, and actually I think the state doesn't allow it, that there's no salaried employees unless there's people doing work. So if you had a camp administrator for summer camp, you could pay them whatever dollars an hour for the work that they're doing, but you couldn't just pay someone just because they're part of the nonprofit.
And who would okay the tenants? Would the board of selectmen or the TA have to?
It would likely be the nonprofit that's overseeing it, so that board would likely have the final say. But by having a board member who's appointed by the town, that they'd get a vote in that. And then you've got the zoning regulations that today only allow school, education, things like that. You couldn't put, for example, a coffee shop in there because there's no commercial allowed. Part of the master plan work that committee's been doing, they are likely going to recommend a commercial overlay for that part of town where you would allow very specific uses. So when we tried to rezone this, or the town tried to rezone it a number of years ago, it was a blanket, let's make it commercial. There was no plan, no strategy, no nothing, so then the rumors of Market Basket, Home Depot and all that started flying around. By having very specific uses outlined, you can say we only want a coffee shop, maybe a deli, farmer's market, and you can put very specific, a shared office space, so for people that maybe work from home, they have a place to go with internet access, quiet space, things like that.
And what's the time frame you'd like to get this done?
So, the feasibility committee's recommendation was that the town take action, the board of selectmen take action by the end of the fiscal year, so by June 30th. In talking with Andrew, just because of the process that the town has to go through, it's an RFP process. So they have to advertise that they're looking for someone to manage this property. They have to accept, there'll probably be bids, but they have to accept proposals from entities. And then evaluate that and whatnot. That process generally takes about 60 days. So we're with town meeting coming up, we're kind of past that window, so it would likely be more in the July timeframe. But we don't want to go too long because the beginning of the fiscal year is a nice kind of hard line where you could really monitor the finances and do an apples to apples comparison year over year. But again, as the building sits there, it's fighting against us when it's vacant. So.
You said a manager of the building, but that wouldn't be the nonprofit person.
Well, that's what we're looking for,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
is,
Alright.
that's the recommendation, is to have a nonprofit come in and take care of it. The town's not a landlord,
No.
the town doesn't really have, the capacity to manage, tenants and maintenance of the building. We don't have a maintenance person in town even, so.
Right.
One of the other things the committee was really worried about is having this building kind of fall into the same model that our other buildings are in. You look at the police station. As a town, we've not approved the money needed to fix that. You go in there and there's still the chalkboards on the wall from when it was a school, I don't know how many years ago, so. We don't wanna, we kinda wanna protect and isolate the Peter Fitzpatrick property from that. So that was why we leaned on a nonprofit. If it's town-owned, the town is still eligible for grants to do repairs and capital improvements. Having a nonprofit in there adds additional grant eligibility. So that nonprofit would now be eligible for additional grants that a municipality may not be eligible for. But then by the nonprofit managing it, the money they bring in for programs goes right back into the building. And you couldn't get to town meeting and say, okay, let's cut the budget for that building, let's move it over here. It makes it truly self-sustaining and reinvest it into that property.
Is it in the budget, what's the amount in the budget for 2020
I
to
think
keep it up to date?
2020,
Whatever, maintained,
I believe it was 80,000, I'd have to go back and check where the final number
but
landed.
at least 80.
80,000 for utilities, and we actually expect that to be a little lower. And then there's a $20,000 insurance rider for vacancy. So until that building is 1/3 occupied, we have to pay, the town pays $20,000 because it's empty. When you have people in there, that brings the risk down, so then the $20,000 rider comes off.
So has that been going since November?
That's been going since November, yes.
Yeah.
Yep, so the district and patch outreach.
That's a lot of
moved
money.
out. It is.
Yeah.
And just, again, just to get, we've been trying to figure out what the exact definition of occupancy is. If I have a room filled with files, is that occupied?
Yeah.
So there's some gray area.
120,000?
It's
80 plus 20.
80 plus
Yeah.
2,500, yeah.
I'm just looking at the
Yep.
additional
Yeah.
insurance costs.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so the board of selectmen has the vote on it, not the town meeting or anything? The
Correct,
Board of
yep,
Selectmen.
so on May
They'll decide.
22nd, Board of Selectmen meeting, they're gonna vote, we're hoping, they're gonna vote to accept our recommendations and vote to implement the recommendations, and then that would instruct the town administrator to execute, on those recommendations. If they vote on them as is, if they amend them, that's in the hands of the Board of Selectmen, but, the feedback so far has been positive, and our hope is that they will start to move forward with,
That's what I was gonna ask, if you heard if there were any counter plans or anything from.
There's always rumblings of things, but in talking to each of the Board of Selectmen, the feedback's been positive. There's a lot of good questions that I've received, since the presentation, last week or this week. But just clarifying some things from the report. I'm also gonna be doing a presentation at the senior center on the same night, May 22nd, so that morning. Because I know from a senior community, they're looking at it from, this is costing us money, just get rid of it. So I wanna make sure that it's clear to everybody that it is costing us money today. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That building sitting there today, tomorrow, a year from now, is going to cost this town money. The only way to combat that is to get people in there who are paying to use it. Whether you're a town department, you're a nonprofit, you're a community organization, you're gonna have to pay to use that building to offset the expenses. And then, as we grow that, those expenses go down to zero from a town perspective. If we wanna sell it, again, it's gonna have to sit there for a couple of years while it's on the market, and, you're gonna have to do a study on the building before you put it on the market.
And
Yeah.
still spend
Still spend
$100,000
$100,000 a year
to keep it
to keep
maintained.
it there, right?
And then pay $1.2 million to have it torn down.
And then you'd have to pay money to tear it down if that's what you wanted to do, or,
It's a great building.
it is.
And our
Fantastic.
community center draws, people into a
Yeah.
town.
Absolutely,
It
Yeah.
most definitely does, so,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
with you.
cultural.
thank you,
yeah,
I appreciate that.
and,
That's good.
yeah, you guys did a lot of hard work, and I really,
did.
like, I hope it's a go.
I hope so
Can't
too.
wait to see,
You're,
you know,
Yeah,
that place
you get a
used
good
that way,
time schedule.
Pepperell
if
Theater.
it goes right along like that, it'd be great.
And the town needs space for events. There's
Absolutely.
actually no, place to
Okay,
have
okay.
a big event.
No.
And that gym is perfect.
The gym is great. We've been lucky with,
Yeah,
so Nancy Archer from Recreation is
Yep.
doing archery in there on Monday nights, which is, my son has done that. It's a great program.
Yep.
On a rainy day like today, we've been able to get some of the younger soccer, like the
Yep.
young preschool soccer kids who they just want a place to run around and kick a ball. So we throw them down there. We've got the senior center pickleball is interested in a space.
Yeah,
So that would be perfect. There's
Yeah.
been some interest from some basketball leagues who are interested. Fire department did a training event. I think it was like a dodgeball thing in there last weekend or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So
it's great space.
there's definite interest in getting folks in there.
Actually, first fundraiser should be a prom or a grease night.
Oh,
There you go.
Yeah, a dance off, but
Dance off.
whatever, in the gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be your first fundraiser.
That'd be great.
Anyways, yeah. So, is that it for the
Yeah,
feasibility?
anything else you wanna say?
You wanna-
I don't think so. No, I mean, I encourage people to read the report.
Right.
I know it's long and some parts may put you to sleep,
Is it
but
all online or?
it's all
Okay,
online. It's all on the
okay.
town website.
Okay.
The main report is one document, and then there's a number of appendices, which are reports and research from other folks that we used. But I encourage people to read it, because if you have any questions, most of them should be answered in here, in
It
terms of
costs the town nothing.
cost of town. This whole thing costs the town nothing. Well, photocopies, that's about
Yeah,
all we
that's
spent
what-
money on.
was
But-
an excellent
Yeah,
job.
amazing.
Everything else was nothing. Yeah.
Amazing.
Very good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
No,
thank you.
thank you.
I have to ask this question. It's
Please.
about the calendar.
Yep,
Oh, you're on the school committee.
I'm on the
He's
school
on the
committee as
school
well.
committee.
Yes.
Have we introduced him as
Oh,
well?
I didn't
So-
know that. Sorry.
That's all right. I already told him I was gonna ask
Yeah.
him this question. Those professional days.
yes.
There's like 13 of them or something, half days, whatever.
Mhm.
So, can the teachers do that the first 2 weeks of their vacation, like take that out of the school year altogether? Their professional days take place at the end of the year when vacation starts. Which,
I don't know a definite yes or no on that. I don't know if any of that is governed by the contract with the union,
right,
in terms of when those days are. I know some of it, you want your training of teachers to be spread out throughout the year. It's better retention that way. You do it all up front. They're not gonna remember, like anybody, you wouldn't remember most of that by the time you got partway through the year. Some feedback
was spread out over the summer.
or spread, well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities. The important thing from my perspective, and I know I get pushback on this all the time, is for people to come forward with ideas like that. Send them, if you can't make it to a meeting, send an email to the school committee. Email's up 24 hours a day. So
I'll
if you're,
send you an email.
Yeah, but like things like that where there's just those ideas, so then we can, as a committee, brainstorm about it and say, well, why can't we do maybe a week of training up front at the beginning of the year, and then maybe you do a couple days in the middle of the year, and then a few more days towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
Or why can't they be consistent? So instead of a Wednesday here and a Tuesday there and a Monday there, other towns have done it every Friday, or every Wednesday. That's where those days land. Or every third Wednesday, or something that's consistent, so those that work and have to find alternative care, that there's some consistency with that. I've looked at calendars from countless towns, they're all different. You get a town in Rhode Island that doesn't have any dates, that's just full days every day of the year. They start the same time we do and they end after us, so they get a few more holidays in there. You get like a Portland, Maine, they get every Friday's a half day. Or Groton, for the early elementary school, I think it's the two Wednesdays a month are half days, and then for 6th grade and above, it's one of those Wednesdays a month is a half day. So there's infinite options, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't think any district anywhere really has found the sweet spot. I think you could argue that there's issues no matter what. But having that many, I know there are a lot of concerns with half days not being full days. So the more half days we have, and we're counting them as full days, we're counting them, and that's lost classroom time.
Yeah,
So from an education perspective, you kind of feel shortchanged, and I understand that perspective. I understand the perspective that having all these half days now means, as a parent, you have to take time off work, or you have to pay for daycare or a babysitter. And that is a huge inconvenience, it's a big financial burden. so there's pros and cons, I think, all over the place, and it's just finding something that works for the majority of people. And the best way I know to get to that spot is to have feedback from the stakeholders.
So if it's important for kids to get their sleep,
Yep.
what about starting school later?
So there's a subcommittee that is looking at school start times. They're really focused on the high school because that's where the biggest impact is. They don't have a recommendation yet, but they are nearing the end of that process. They did an event probably about a month and a half ago where they had a professional come in and do a talk about the impacts of early start times for kids. Yeah.
That's good.
So I think there are likely some changes coming. I know a number of districts around the country have made some adjustments based on that. So starting later, there's impacts everywhere, right? So the later you start, especially if you move high school to start later, that's gonna impact elementary and middle school. And then especially during daylight savings or the other way. Now you're gonna have kids getting home later when it's dark, so what does that mean for after school programs? So there's a lot of moving pieces that need to be looked at, but the school start time is definitely something that the committee's looking at.
Those are all my questions.
Okay.
Yeah, do you have any more? No, just
Very
let's
good.
get moving on your feasibility.
I appreciate the support, yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you so
I
much,
appreciate
thanks
it.
for coming by.
Absolutely, thank you.
That's it.